One of the challenges that comes up with COP is that COP and other climate processes, because they are still stuck in carbon, because they are still stuck in what industrialized countries need to do in reducing emissions, a whole amount of focus is on what infrastructure, what expenditures, what money needs to be spent in mitigation.
Sorry,
Now,
Adil.
if you are in an adaptation world like IMG, but once you are in an adaptation world, for those who are facing adaptation, managing molecules is not going to ease their immediate pain, because adaptation gets implemented through pressures on livelihoods. So again, think about the floods, think about the sea level rise, think about the droughts that I talk about. What happens when they happen, right? What happens when they happen? What happens when they happen, or a heat wave in Karachi? What happens when they happen is that the livelihoods of people gets under pressure on issues like better infrastructure, on issues like better cities, on issues like greener spaces. And none of them are easy to understand if you are caught in the language of carbon molecules and in the language of mitigation. It was that disconnect. It wasn't that people didn't care about climate. It was a language between people for whom climate means something totally different. If you are a major emitter, not just countries, person, you and me, the climate language becomes, oh, we must reduce emissions. And yes, they must reduce emissions. But if you are on the wrong end of adaptation, on the wrong end of impacts, what you are really talking about is loss and damage. What you are really talking about is, I need resources to make Karachi more livable. I need resources to deal with Lahore. And that doesn't translate into the language of emission cuts. And that is the political divide that you see in this debate happening again and again. And to me, that is why it is no longer a conversation that is very useful. What would be a different conversation? A different conversation would be one that would look at climate from a development lens and would look at climate expenditure not simply from a carbon counting, molecule counting lens as it has. In many ways, I foresee a much darker future, not just because of climate impact, but of climate politics. Till now, generally, and I've been a very much supporter of this process, the assumption was that the world is looking for a common solution. More and more, it is clear that the world is not looking for a common solution. More and more, it is clear that there already are climate winners and climate losers. We all talk about, it's eventually going to impact everyone. Sure, it's going to impact everyone, but it's not going to impact everyone equally. Let me end there. Unfortunately, not on a very good note. Money, the point that I had mentioned. COVID has proved that the money is there. COVID has proved that what is not there for climate is an actual belief that this is existential. It proved that when people think that the threat is existential and real, the money appears. That is why it becomes a high security issue. I hope it does for climate too. And finally, science. The biggest sort of lesson of COVID has been how amazing science has been. I could not have believed, no one could have believed that in a matter of months, we would have a vaccine that would be very, very effective. The problem is climate change does not have a vaccine. The problem is that we came to the science too late. And in climate change, as we should have done in COVID, the precautionary measures, that the precautionary tale, the people saying stop this before it happens, were ignored, just as we are ignoring them in climate today.
डॉक्टर आदिल नजम साहब, कोविड रेट क्यों और अब क्या करना है, ये डॉक्टर आदिल नजम के मजमून का उन्वान था। उन्होंने कहा कि अगर हम माहौलियाती तब्दीली का सही जायजा लें तो हम इस नतीजे पर पहुंचेंगे कि हम अभी से एडॉप्टेशन के ज़माने में दाखिल हो चुके हैं। उन्होंने COP 26 में होने वाले मुज़ाकरात पर नाउमीदी का इज़हार करते हुए कहा कि हमें ये देखना है कि मौसम हमें क्या बता रहा है, ना कि बैनुल अक़वामी गुफ्त व शनीद की महफ़िलें क्या बावर करवाना चाह रही हैं। उन्होंने ये भी कहा कि कोविड के वबा ने हमें ये दिखाया है कि जब इंसानियत ये समझ लेती है कि हालात बड़े ख़तरनाक हैं तो उनसे लड़ने के लिए हर तरफ से पैसों की भरमार होने लगती है। जिस वक्त दुनिया मान लेगी कि मौसम की तब्दीली इसी तरह ख़तरनाक है जैसे कोविड, उस दिन इक़दामात के लिए पैसे भी आ जाएंगे। डॉक्टर आदिल नजम ने कहा कि एडॉप्टेशन के ज़माने में मौसमियाती हिजान पर बहस कार्बन से हटकर पानी के ऊपर नफ़ी असरात पर आ जाती है। उनके मुशाहिदे में मौसमियाती तब्दीलियों का असर हर एक पर बराबर ही होता है और इस बात की अशद ज़रूरत है कि तरक्याती अमल में सबकी शमूलियत को यकीनी बनाया जाए।
Thank you very much, Dr. Adil Najam. Now I would like to invite our second keynote speaker. It is Dr. Patrick Bond.
It's such a great honor to be with you. Adil, all of your slides were tremendous. I need to learn lessons, very entertaining and effective. I'm simply going to pick up on some of the same ideas, but not from the insider scientific standpoint, instead from the standpoint of what we would call a climate justice movement in civil society. I think Adil is one of the people we would say is a very effective insider. I'll look at what the outsiders, and if you have a division of labor in this country, in South Africa, we sometimes think about people who are out shaking the trees for the fruit, and other people who make jam. You have tree shakers outside and jam makers inside, hopefully working with a similar analysis and a division of labor that's coherent. And in doing so, I'd like to just quickly look at some conflicts over the scorecard of Glasgow and how, in my view, some of the flaws that Adil's already mentioned, Copenhagen, where I was a civil society host in Durban, and Paris have been reproduced. And also climate finance, right? The not just 100 billion, but other big questions about financial markets, and also the climate debt, the reparations, especially that you in Pakistan are owed. And then maybe I'll have time to finish with where I think we can go with activism, divestment from fossil fuels, and maybe even trade sanctions associated with high carbon trading, and then a 1987 precedent, the Montreal Protocol. So we don't lose hope. And I do want to say at the outset that you're right at the level of, let's say, global cutting-edge connectivity between water and climate. Here, for example, is Standing Rock in the Dakotas, where the Sioux people in the United States, who've been so oppressed for centuries with the invasion and the genocide of the settlers, and they've said water is life in their defense of their land, not just their water, but also the climate, because they're trying to stop an oil pipeline. We in Southern Africa, with Mozambique next door, and massive cyclones, here droughts, fires, we've seen extreme events like a rain bomb affect our city of Durban, but nothing as severe as you've had. And that's why it's so irritating, isn't it, to see Boris Johnson clap himself on the back and all of his mates being immensely proud, and a world-changing agreement a couple of days ago. And he did acknowledge that some countries are watering down the language. There are some, let's say, positives emphasized in this case by the Bloomberg Green. Their media coverage talked of the first time we've ever seen words like coal into a climate agreement, right? And that there will be some emissions cuts still promised. But, as Adil said, there's a big dilemma here about the cheating associated with it. I'll pick that up in the financing section. And then particularly because carbon trading has terrible dangers. The US and China really didn't have a commitment worth reporting on. In fact, they're, with their huge militaries, especially the US, the single largest emitter is the Pentagon. And overall, I think the win that they will claim in the mainstream is to legitimate what I think many of us would consider to be not a conference of the parties at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, but the COP really translates to a conference of polluters.